All right, so today we're going to
Okay.
dive deep into Brooke Rollins,
Yeah.
Trump's recent pick for the next Secretary of Agriculture.
Mm,
Now, you might be thinking in another Trump appointee, but
right.
here's the thing. Rollins isn't your typical agriculture choice.
Interesting.
Her background is surprisingly diverse, and her connection to Trump goes way back,
I see.
making her a fascinating piece in this whole dream team narrative.
Yeah.
So our mission today
Mhm.
is to unpack her history,
Okay.
her ties to Trump, and what we can glean about her policy stances
Gotcha.
to see how she might fit into Trump's second term.
And that's key, isn't it? We need to understand where she's coming from to get a sense of where she might take things.
Exactly.
It's like those choose your own adventure books.
I love those.
Her past experiences are the choices that have led her to this point.
Absolutely. So let's rewind a bit.
Okay.
Rollins wasn't always in the political spotlight.
Right.
She started out studying agricultural development at Texas A&M University, which you might think, okay, agriculture background makes sense.
Makes sense.
But hold on. She made history there, becoming the first woman ever elected student body president.
Okay.
Not your average ag student, right?
It speaks to her ambition and leadership skills early on.
For sure.
And it's interesting, because she wasn't just studying agriculture in a vacuum.
Right.
She was actively involved in organizations like
Yeah.
Future Farmers of America and 4-H, gaining hands-on experience and connecting with the community.
I see.
That kind of groundwork can shape someone's perspective on the industry in a very tangible way.
Right. So we see these roots in agriculture.
Yeah.
But then she goes on to get a law degree and works as a litigation attorney.
Interesting.
Seems like she's constantly seeking new challenges and
Yeah.
broadening her horizons.
And that's what makes her such a compelling figure.
Yeah.
She's not just a one-dimensional policy wonk.
Right.
She brings this diverse set of skills and experiences to the table, which could be invaluable in a role like Secretary of Agriculture.
For sure.
Think about it. You're dealing with farmers, businesses, consumers, international trade.
Right. It's a huge job.
It takes a certain level of versatility to navigate that landscape effectively.
Okay, so we've got this image of Rollins as a driven, accomplished woman with a foot in both the agricultural world and the legal arena.
Mm-hmm.
But how does she connect with Trump? Where does that relationship begin?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Rollins serves as the president and CEO of the America First Policy Institute,
Okay.
a think tank that's been dubbed Trump's White House in waiting.
Wow.
It's packed with individuals who are deeply aligned with his agenda
I see.
and are poised to step into key roles, just like we're seeing now with Rollins.
So it's safe to say she's firmly in Trump's inner circle.
It seems that way.
But her connection to him goes even deeper than that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't she hold some pretty significant positions during his first term?
Absolutely. She served as director of the Domestic Policy Council.
Assistant to the president for strategic initiatives
Wow.
and director of the Office of American Innovation.
Those are some serious credentials.
They are.
It's clear that Trump trusts her judgment
Right.
and values her perspective.
Yeah.
But what does that actually tell us about her policy leanings?
Mm-hmm.
How does she align with Trump's America First agenda?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
It is.
She's been relatively quiet
Yeah,
about specific agricultural policies so far.
which makes sense.
But we can start piecing things together by looking at her track record
Okay.
and her affiliation with the America First Policy Institute,
Right.
which, as we've discussed, is deeply intertwined with Trump's worldview.
So we're dealing with a bit of a mystery here,
We are.
but one with some tantalizing clues.
Sure.
And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. We're not just looking at a resume.
Right.
We're trying to understand the motivations
Yeah.
and the potential impact of a key player in Trump's second term. Exactly. And that's where the real insights lie. It's
Yeah.
not just about what she's done.
Right.
It's about what those experiences reveal about her approach to leadership,
Okay.
her understanding of complex issues,
Yeah.
and her ability to translate those into policy.
All right. So we've laid the groundwork here.
Okay.
We've explored Rollins' background, her diverse skill set,
Yeah.
and her deep connection to Trump.
All right.
But now we need to dig deeper
Okay.
to uncover what lies beneath the surface.
Yeah.
What are the values and priorities that drive her?
Right.
And how might those shape her actions as Secretary of Agriculture?
For sure. So welcome back to our deep dive into Brooke Rollins, Trump's pick for Agriculture Secretary.
Yeah, last time we laid out her unique journey from Texas A&M to Trump's inner circle.
Yeah, a pretty fascinating path.
Right. It's not every day you see a former student body president turned litigation attorney heading up the Department of Agriculture. But now that we've got a sense of her background, let's get down to brass tacks. What might her policies actually look like?
Well, as we mentioned before, she's been pretty tight-lipped about specific agricultural policies.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which, let's be honest, is pretty standard for a nominee at this stage.
Makes sense.
They want to avoid making any promises they can't keep.
Right. So how do we decode this mystery? Do we just have to wait and see?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
We can look at her past actions, her affiliations, and her overall political philosophy to glean some insights.
Okay.
And remember, she's deeply embedded in the America First camp.
Right.
That gives us a pretty strong starting point.
Okay. So let's talk America first. It seems like a pretty broad concept. How might it translate to actual agricultural policies?
Well, one area to watch closely is trade.
Okay.
The America First Policy Institute has been critical of existing trade agreements,
Mm-hmm.
arguing that they often put American farmers at a disadvantage.
I see.
Rollins might push for renegotiating these agreements, potentially even using tariffs as leverage to get a better deal, just like we saw in Trump's first term.
Tariffs, huh? But wouldn't that also hurt American farmers?
Well,
I mean, if their products become more expensive for foreign buyers,
right.
doesn't that hurt their exports?
That's the balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, you want to protect American farmers from unfair competition.
Right.
On the other hand, you don't want to stifle their access to global markets.
It's a tough one.
It's one of those tricky dilemmas that Rollins will have to grapple with if she's confirmed.
Okay, so trade is definitely something to keep an eye on, but agriculture is about more than just exports,
Right.
right? What about things like farm subsidies, the kind of support that many farmers rely on?
Subsidies.
Yeah.
This is where Rollins's fiscal conservatism comes into play.
Okay.
Remember, she's been a vocal critic of government spending, particularly Biden's economic plans.
Right.
She might take a hard look at existing subsidy programs, arguing that they create dependency and distort the market.
So we're talking about potential cuts to farm subsidies. That could
Yeah.
be a pretty big deal for a lot of farmers.
It could indeed, and it would likely face strong opposition from agricultural groups who depend on those subsidies. It'll be interesting to see how Rollins navigates those political pressures. Will she hold firm to her fiscal principles, or will she be willing to compromise to maintain support within the agricultural community?
And it's not just about the farmers themselves, right?
Right.
Consumers are also affected by agricultural policies.
Yeah.
What about things like food prices and food assistance programs like SNAP?
Right, those are crucial considerations.
Yeah.
On food prices, Rollins's market-driven approach suggests she might favor policies that promote competition and efficiency,
Okay.
potentially leading to lower prices for consumers.
You got it, yeah.
But it's a complex equation with
Yeah.
factors like weather transportation costs and global demand all playing a role.
Okay, so food prices are a bit of a wild card, but what about food assistance programs?
Yeah.
Millions of Americans rely on SNAP to put food on the table. How might Rollins's views on government spending and individual self-reliance influence her approach to those programs?
That's a key question, and one where her alignment with the America First philosophy might come into sharp focus.
Okay.
The America First Policy Institute has advocated for stricter work requirements for SNAP recipients,
Okay.
arguing that it encourages self-sufficiency and reduces reliance on government assistance.
Stricter work requirements. That sounds like it could make it harder for some people to access food assistance.
It's a possibility, and it's a point of contention, with some arguing that it unfairly burdens those who are already struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Rollins will have to weigh these competing perspectives.
Right.
Her commitment to fiscal responsibility and individual self-reliance versus the needs of vulnerable populations.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. And it's clear that Rollins's potential tenure as Secretary of Agriculture could bring some significant changes to the way things are done.
Absolutely, but we're not just talking about abstract policies here, are we? These decisions have real-world consequences for farmers, consumers, and the environment.
You're right. It's about the food we eat, the livelihoods of those who produce it, and the sustainability of our agricultural system as a whole.
So where do we go from here? We've talked about trade subsidies, food assistance, and this overarching America First approach. What's the missing piece of the puzzle?
Well, we've explored what Rollins might DO, but to really understand her potential impact, we need to delve into the WHY. What are the core values that drive her? What's the deeper philosophy that underpins her policy positions?
That's a great point. It's not enough to just look at the surface. We need to understand the motivations, the beliefs, the driving forces that shape her worldview. And that's where we'll pick things up in part 3 of our deep dive. Okay, so welcome back to our final part of this deep dive.
Yeah, we've spent the last 2 parts really digging into Brooke Rollins, Trump's nominee for Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah, we've explored her background,
Right.
her close ties to Trump's inner circle.
And even speculated about what her policies might look like.
We've built quite the picture, haven't we?
Yeah, from Texas A&M to the America First Policy Institute. We've seen how her experiences have shaped her journey, but now let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We've talked about what she might DO,
Mm-hmm.
but what about the WHY?
Yeah.
What are the core values that drive her?
Right.
What's the engine behind her political philosophy?
That's the key to understanding any leader, isn't it?
Yeah.
Their actions are a reflection of their beliefs.
Okay.
So if we want to anticipate how she might approach this role,
Right.
we need to decode her worldview.
Okay, so let's put on our detective hats again.
Yeah.
Where do we start looking for those clues?
Well, one recurring theme in her career is a strong emphasis on individual empowerment and self-reliance.
Okay.
We see it in her work on criminal justice reform,
Mm.
where she championed programs aimed at giving people second chances and helping them reintegrate into society.
Right, like her involvement with the First Step Act. It wasn't just about reducing prison sentences.
Right.
It was about providing opportunities for rehabilitation and reintegration. It's about equipping individuals with the tools to succeed on their own terms.
Exactly. And that same philosophy could very well extend to her approach to agriculture.
How so?
Think about it. Instead of solely relying on government subsidies, she might prioritize policies that encourage farmers to be more entrepreneurial, to innovate, to adapt to changing market conditions.
So it's not just about handing out aid.
Right.
It's about fostering a culture of self-reliance within the agricultural sector.
Exactly.
Interesting. Are there any other clues that point in this direction?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Look at her leadership at the Texas Public Policy Foundation,
Okay.
a think tank known for its free market principles and limited government stance. It's all about empowering individuals and reducing reliance on government intervention.
And let's not forget her involvement with the Save America Coalition,
Right.
which actively opposed Biden's economic proposals.
Yeah, they argued that those plans were too interventionist,
Okay.
that they stifled individual initiative and fiscal responsibility.
Okay, so we're starting to see a pattern here.
Right.
Self-reliance, free markets, limited government. Those seem to be the pillars of her political philosophy.
Exactly. And if we apply that framework to the Department of Agriculture,
Yeah.
we can start to anticipate some potential shifts in direction.
Okay.
We might see less emphasis on traditional subsidies,
Mm.
more focus on fostering competition and innovation within the agricultural sector.
Okay.
She might push for deregulation, arguing that it empowers farmers to make their own decisions and adapt to market demands.
That's a pretty significant departure from the more interventionist approach favored by the Biden administration.
It is, and it's bound to generate some heated debate,
Yeah.
especially within the agricultural community, which has long relied on government support.
Okay, so we've got self-reliance, free markets, limited government.
Mm.
Is there anything else we should consider when trying to understand what makes Brooke Rollins tick?
One more piece of the puzzle worth mentioning is her deep-rooted patriotism and belief in American exceptionalism.
Okay.
It's a recurring theme throughout her career, from her time at Texas A&M to her leadership at the America First Policy Institute.
Right, it's not just about policies and economics.
Yeah.
It's about a vision for America's place in the world, and that vision seems to be deeply embedded in her worldview.
Exactly. And that perspective could have significant implications for her approach to agricultural trade.
Okay, how so?
She might prioritize American interests above all else, even if it means taking a more protectionist stance in global negotiations.
So potentially putting American farmers first,
Yeah,
even if it ruffles some feathers internationally.
it's a distinct possibility.
Okay.
Remember, the America First philosophy is all about asserting American sovereignty and putting American interests at the forefront, even if it means challenging existing global norms.
It's a bold approach for sure, and it raises all sorts of questions about how she'll navigate the complex web of international relationships, trade agreements, and global food security concerns.
Absolutely. Those are the kinds of challenges that any Secretary of Agriculture faces.
Right.
But with Rollins at the helm, we might see a more assertive, America-centric approach to those global issues.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've explored Rollins' background, her political philosophy,
Yeah.
and even speculated about her potential impact on the agricultural landscape.
Mm-hmm.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to one central question. What does it all mean?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
We've assembled the pieces of the puzzle,
Right.
but it's up to each of us to interpret the bigger picture.
Exactly. What do you think, based on what we've discussed, is the most significant takeaway from Brooke Rollins' nomination? What's the one thing that our listeners should really ponder as they watch this story unfold?
I think the most crucial takeaway is that Rollins represents a potential paradigm shift for the Department of Agriculture. Her combination of experience, political connections, and deeply held convictions suggests a departure from the status quo. Whether that shift leads to positive or negative outcomes remains to be seen.
Sure.
But one thing is certain, it will be fascinating to watch how she navigates the complexities of this vital industry.
Right.
And what impact her decisions have on American agriculture and its place in the world.
Well said, and that's a perfect note to end on, don't you think? This deep dive has given you the information and the insights to understand the significance of this nomination. Now it's your turn to stay engaged, to observe the developments, and to draw your own conclusions about Brooke Rollins' potential impact on the future of American agriculture. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.